to get it started right now with this amazing opportunity in sharing more about the coffee guide that the International Trade Center put together in the last couple of years. So I wanted to tell you that in June of 2020, one of our chapter members in Guatemala received a kind invitation from the ITC to support the updated work of the coffee guide. And we both agreed that the IWCA could contribute in a different way. Among all the IWCA chapter founders and members, there are many coffee experts, which contribution we knew could make the difference. Gender is a transversal subject related to all the topics in the coffee guide. With the consent of the ITC coordinators, 8 women were engaged and received the text and information to be reviewed, updated, and improved. It was a lot of work, but the engagement of these IWCA experts proved that gender issues could be discussed under a different perspective, proactive and more real. The Coffee Guide is the world's most extensive, hands-on and neutral source of information on the international coffee trade. It covers trade issues relevant of coffee growers, traders, exporters, transportation companies, certifiers, associations, authorities, and other relevant actors such as roasters, baristas, and many more. So the coffee industry would consider the Coffee Guide as a go reference, and we have copies, and we will have more news, but I will let the coordinators and the people responsible in the International Trade Center to explain more about that. And for that, I am honored to introduce you to Catherine Oglietti. Catherine is the Coffee Guide Network Coordinator with the International Trade Center Alliance for Action Program, which is part of the Inclusive Agribusiness System team. She is a professor of business administration at Lee McRae College in North Carolina, formerly a coffee importer with organic products trading company. She is committed to collaborating toward a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable coffee sector. So Catherine, you have the floor. Thank you so much for joining us from Brazil. That's awesome. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. What a pleasure to be here today. Yes, I'm joining you from Brazil International Coffee Week, where we'll be launching the Coffee Guide in Portuguese. We're very excited for this new translation to reach as many producers and small and medium enterprises around the world. Sarah is going to start our PowerPoint presentation. Go ahead. Great, and here we are. Here's all of our pictures of all the different presenters today. These are all these women on the front are all actually contributors to the Coffee Guide. Go ahead to the next slide. So we are pleased to share with you information about the 4th edition of the Coffee Guide, which was created in a co-collaborative process, which I will talk about, but by the International Trade Center and in its program, Alliances for Action. So about the institutions behind the guide, the International Trade Center is a joint agency of the World Trade Organization and the United Nations. ITC is actually the only development agency that is fully dedicated to supporting the internationalization of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. And Alliances for Action is an initiative within the ITC that leverages partnerships for sustainable food systems. We use a collaborative approach with different organizations and stakeholders, but importantly, making that connection between the private sector and the public sector. And this edition of the Coffee Guide was created by the Alliances for Action team using that collaborative approach. Next slide. building on a legacy from commodity handbook to comprehensive workbook. Many of you may already be familiar with the Coffee Guide. As I speak to people around the world, they say, oh, the Coffee Guide. My first day as a trader, my boss set the guide on my desk and told me, read this, and then you'll get started. It's a reference guide, started as a reference guide for traders, especially for the exporters, importers around the world. It has evolved over the decades. And this edition, we are proud to say we used a co-collaborative process, a co-creation process through collaborations with organizations around the world. From version to version, it became more inclusive. You'll see it started as an exporter's guide, but over time, we intentionally dropped the name of the exporter's guide and just called it the Coffee Guide in the fourth edition to reflect that this information is not just about or targeted towards exporters. It includes all stakeholders within the value chain, especially producers, small and medium enterprises, and producing countries. And it shifts from featuring coffee as a commodity to featuring coffee as a unique product with all of its complexities. Next slide. Here's a graphic to show all the different organizations around the world that contributed to this version of the Coffee Guide. This collaborative, it was created with a co-creation approach that reflects broad geographical and sectoral coverage. Over 70 expert contributors contributed to this guide, representing different organizations from around the world. You can see under global, IWCA was an important contributor to the guide. The guide has broad representations of the sector, including producer representation, public sector, private sector, the trade, academic sector, and research. And importantly, as we're going to talk about more today, IWCA's contributions were critical to this edition. It was not just, as many would have expected IWCA's contribution to be, it was not a contribution just talking about gender in the value chain. As an important topic as that is, IWCA's contribution was unique due to the range of expertise and geographic locations of IWCA members. So IWCA actually contributed to each chapter of this technical guide. They contributed their own technical expertise. And this is just critical and important, and we're very proud and grateful for IWCA's contributions. Next slide. So a little bit about the guide. It is built to be user-friendly. There are 8 simple modules that are designed as an informative source for all and a practical tool for producers and exporters. At its core is the topic of sustainability. It includes the latest statistics and trends from the industry while also being a standard reference for the coffee industry. And it uses inclusiveness as a core strategy. Coffee producers and small and medium enterprises are both represented and targeted as users. There's gender mainstreaming in content and inclusivity in contributions. We have translations into Spanish, into French, and now we're launching into Portuguese. And it used alliances for action, participatory process, and strategic partnerships across the industry to make this possible. Next slide. So this is how we see the Coffee Guide as a tool for empowerment, using gender mainstreaming and inclusivity. So the idea here is that women working in coffee need tools and knowledge in the coffee industry in general to be successful in their careers, in their and in their contributions. So what the Coffee Guide does to allow for this is providing really that foundational knowledge that shows all the basic components of the coffee industry. Blanca shared with me the IWCA chapter survey from June of 2022, where you all indicated what you wanted to know more about. And I wanted to highlight some linkages between what you said in that survey and the Coffee Guide. One thing you mentioned that you want to know more about is access to markets. Well, that is covered in chapter 3. One is access to finance. We have a complete chapter 8 that discusses different methodologies to access finance. Climate change and adaptation strategies is covered in chapter 2 on sustainability. Coffee producing methodologies in chapter 5. Agronomic training, also chapter 5, and coffee export and import training, which was the basis of the original Coffee Guide, is covered in chapter 7. Just to give you a snippet that this information is there. I also want to highlight that over 28 women contributed to the Coffee Guide. And specifically from IWCA, there were many authors that contributed to the guide. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to name them individually, but move on. So this shows the chapters that are in the guide. It starts with chapter 1, giving a broad overview of the coffee sector. Chapter 2 is all about sustainability. Chapter 3 is understanding the coffee market. And I want to highlight what's interesting in chapter 3 is also information about, with data about export numbers around the world, with those export numbers divided into 3 segments of coffee: standard, premium, and specialized. So you can benchmark and see how your country or organization does in comparison to industry data. Chapter 4 is about digital and technical transformation. Chapter 5 is about coffee quality from seed to cup, and that includes anything from cultivation to sensory analysis and coffee grading at the end. Chapter 6 is included information about markets and hedging and how to manage price risk. Chapter 7 is about the commercial aspects of coffee trade, including exporting and importing. And chapter 8 is about managing financial risk. And I will leave it to Sarah to talk about, go into a deep dive about sustainability.
Before, I would like to introduce Sarah, because she was a key person in ITC when we put everything together. When I told her we have 8 women from IWCA who want to contribute, she said, how are we going to make this? And I said, well, I will put everything together. I will spread the texts and everything what we needed, and then I put them back together in one document, and I sent it to Sarah. It was a lot of work for everyone, but it was a great experience. So let me introduce you to Sarah Charles. Sarah is a co-author of the ITC's 4th edition of this popular coffee guide, a consultant for the International Trade Center Alliance for Action's Sustainable Agribusiness Program, and a writer for Perfect Daily Grind. She is committed to contributing to the systemic transformation of our food and trade systems through knowledge sharing, reporting, and storytelling. So Sarah, the floor is with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Blanca, for the kind words. And yes, it was a pleasure working with you on the coffee guide. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you virtually. So we don't have a lot of time, but Catherine and I thought it would be nice to zoom in on sustainability. So sustainability, as you can see on this slide, is one chapter. We've dedicated an entire chapter of the coffee guide to sustainability, which was actually Martina Bozzola, one of the co-authors of the Coffee Guide, took the lead on writing this chapter. However, I also want to frame sustainability as the guiding thread of all the chapters, in the same way that IWCA's contributions were across the chapters, not just a section on women empowerment, because sustainability and women participation and engagement are at the core of everything. It's not just one topic that's separate. So I just wanted to highlight that. So yeah, today I'd like to zoom in a little bit on sustainability. We hear it as a buzzword. We're kind of getting bored of it, of hearing that word all the time. We've kind of lost the meaning, I think, of what it is. So I just wanted to go back to the basics. Basically, what is it? It's about meeting our needs now without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So sustainability is looking at what we need today, but also thinking of those who are going to be in the coffee industry tomorrow. It protects and prioritizes the well-being of people and planets. So putting people and planet before profit. It allows for social, environmental, and economic growth in the long term. So not just quick wins, we're thinking ahead. And finally, it promotes diversity, inclusion, and equity across the board. So why must the coffee sector embrace sustainable practices? We often push a lot of the time producer communities to sort of blindly take on new certifications or to become sustainable, you know, just because. But I think it's important to really understand why it's important, why it's something practical that's really for the benefit of everyone. First of all, climate change is advancing. So this means that smallholder coffee farmers, who are basically the driving force behind the coffee industry, they're the most vulnerable and at the same time, the least resilient to its effects, which is important for our audience today, I think. Women producers are especially affected because they have less access to land, they have less access to credit, and also less access to information overall. And finally, 125 million people depend on coffee for their livelihoods, which is now at risk because climate change is advancing. So that's one important point. Arable land for coffee may decrease. So all of this is covered in depth in the Coffee Guide. When I'm telling you now, I really had to highlight, you know, the main points. Rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, increased extreme weather events are happening because of climate change. Yields and livelihoods are at risk. And by 2050, it's predicted that up to 75% of arable land will be lost for Arabica and 60% for Robusta. So it's huge and it's coming. So it's really important to act now. And then meanwhile, on the other side, demand for coffee keeps rising. So this is covered in our chapter 3, which looks at the coffee market and the production and consumption dynamics. In the last 20 years, production has doubled. Demand keeps rising steadily, and it's expected to further increase. And by 2050, it's predicted that demand will be at 300 million bags, also huge. And then I felt it was important to also underline the coffee paradox. A lot of you in the audience will probably know what this is, but it's basically this paradox that while the coffee price increases for consumers, it tends to decrease for producers, or at best remains unstable. So it's a paradox and it's also an injustice. So these are all important points. So on one hand, you're seeing the arable land for coffee reducing, on the other hand, the demand rising. So it's obvious that we have an issue. Moving beyond certification. So I also wanted to talk about this. While the Coffee Guide does give you a useful breakdown of all the different certifications that you know, like fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, Bird Friendly, and certifications do have their merits and were created with good intentions in mind. A lot of you who've worked with them know that they also have their downsides. They don't always work. They're often costly. And just like any system, it's not perfect. So we're also seeing a rise of what we call a movement beyond certification. So basically, coffee industry players are rallying to find other ways to act concretely for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So first, I wanted to talk about just generally what climate action is. So climate smart operations and climate awareness. So the two main concepts are adaptation and mitigation. So adaptation is basically technical solutions to adapt coffee production and processing to climate changes. Climate change mitigation is essentially measures to reduce greenhouse gases to avoid further climate change. And this can include, for example, the concept of a circular economy. So you can see here on the right, there's this infographic that we created for the coffee guide, which I think an infographic is always nice because you can understand in a second the concept, whereas words don't always do that. So you can basically see here that the concept is that we go from a take, make, dispose model to a zero waste model. So basically, whatever you're using, it sort of, goes around in a cycle and you end up reusing it rather than disposing of it. I also wanted to highlight the concept of climate justice, which is basically a people-centered approach to climate action, equitable sharing of burdens and responsibilities. So basically, climate justice recognizes that climate change effects are inequitably and harm is inequitably distributed across the globe, with basically people in developing countries, which includes coffee producers, being a lot more vulnerable to and a lot more harmed and affected by the effects of climate change. Whereas on the other side, most of the source of climate change and pollution often comes from developed countries who are the least affected. So you see this injustice, and climate justice is about recognizing this first, and secondly, agreeing to distribute the responsibility of climate change, equitably across the globe and across sectors. So basically, it all boils down to we need a collective value chain approach. This is crucial. It's everyone's responsibility. So still under the theme of moving beyond certification, what I was mentioning earlier, we're seeing sustainability initiatives popping up, people rallying together to say, okay, certification isn't enough. It's not the solution to everything. We need more and we need it now. And I find it, inspiring to see this happen. So I've listed a few here that are also listed in the guide, but of course there are many more. The Global Coffee Platform, the World Coffee Research, Enveritas, the Initiative for Coffee and Climate, Sustainable Agriculture, Food and Environment Platform, the World Coffee Producers Forum, the International Women's Coffee Alliance, Café Femenino. These are all alliances and organizations that are basically actors, people coming together to find solutions, right? And doing things. And at producer and buyer level, sustainability schemes are being put in place outside of certification frameworks. So I'm not saying abandon your certifications, but I am saying it's worth, looking at the architecture that exists, and seeing what works for you, seeing what it's worth joining, because there are other solutions or complementary solutions. And then this next topic is also important. Some of you may have heard of it, others of you may not. We're now shifting from voluntary to mandatory sustainability standards. So all these certifications And all these initiatives that I've told you about, they're voluntary. It's basically an option. It's if you want to do it, right? Now the EU has just had a directive approved that says basically that all companies with staff of over 500 will have to comply by legal sustainability standards for human rights and the environment. So this is a huge move, and actually it's pretty historic because it's been implemented on certain value chains, but never across all agricultural value chains and at this scale. So it's been approved, and it's going to have a huge impact on coffee and on coffee producing countries, because while they are not directly targeted by the legislation, obviously if the EU company who's buying the coffee needs to prove that the coffee was ethically sourced, environmentally responsible, etc., they're going to need to get that assurance from the producer that they're sourcing their coffee from. So inevitably, the burden of proof is being passed down to the producer, right? So you can imagine that this creates all sorts of new responsibilities for producers, new rules to abide by, new costs for them also, because it's expensive to prove that you're being environmentally sound and etc. So this is a deep topic. There are many issues with this. It's a great step in the right direction. Obviously, I mean, we're making it mandatory now for people to respect certain things, but that's why I say context is crucial. It's going to need accompanying measures to help coffee producers adapt and comply to these new measures. So I think it's important. I'm just raising it here. It's something to be aware of, and I encourage you to look it up, because knowledge is power. And then my last slide is basically some tips. I always like to end on a practical note, something that people can take away, and it's not just blah, blah, So the first tip is prepare. Okay, so accountability, transparency, traceability, these are no longer optional. It's just now going to be, regardless of the EU legislation, is something that's going to be a requirement if you want to operate in the coffee industry, I think, increasingly. So I think that it's important to set up sustainability departments to, get informed, allocate the right resources, not just financial, but also human, and align your business strategies to this new way that the world is operating in. Convene and collaborate. So seek trusted partnerships with your clients, with your investors, also with your colleagues. Identify and join collectives and organizations that align with your objectives. So what I was saying before, just have a look around, see what's out there. You're always more powerful if you join a group of people. Women unite. So women remain underrepresented, underpaid, and underestimated in the coffee sector overall. Every single coffee event I go to is, 80% men, except maybe an IWCA meeting. So I don't know about you, but I really feel it, and I it's quite tiring. So I think that unity, amongst women, supporting and promoting each other, and setting standards for the next generation will help us rise. And I really stand firm by that message. And finally, knowledge is power. So don't underestimate the power of knowledge and information. The more you know, the better you can respond, the better you can negotiate, the better you can manage your business, and the better you can grow. Seek out knowledge products like the Coffee Guide, but not only. Share them with your community. Don't keep them for yourself. So, books, webinars, podcasts, social media accounts, blogs, it's the era of information, and I think, you know, that we really need to leverage that. Thank you.
Oh, Sarah, thank you so much. This is, for me, it's overwhelming because you said in very few words what we really we are trying all the way to accomplish through the IWCA structure, to educate, to get the network that we need so that we get all united, communicated, and share, and everything what you just said. So this is great. So before we go to our Q&A section, so everybody, please, if you have questions, go to the little window there, and I'll be pending on those questions to be answered at the end. But before that, we decided that we wanted to have the comments of two of our IWC experts who not only supported and contributed to the coffee guide, but also used it in the past. So we want to know what they think about it. And our first chapter member is Maritza Midense from the IWCA Honduras. She is a lifetime career that began working in London at the International Coffee Organization, then working at the national scale with the coffee authorities, the IWCA in Honduras. In 2013, she was the first president of the IWCA chapter of Honduras, and she represented her country in Hamburg, Taiwan, and on different occasions in the SCA conferences. She has been the manager of her family business, Highland Coffee, for over 25 years and keeps updated in economic and geopolitical matters that influence the coffee market. So thank you so much, Maritza, for joining us. The microphone is on you. You are muted. You are muted.
Buenos dias, huh? Now you can hear me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm very, very grateful to IWCA for giving me the opportunity to tell this audience why the coffee guide is important in aspects that concern trading, which involves buying and selling coffee, and why the coffee guide is to be used as a tool for empowerment. According to the United Nations Economic and Social Council 2002, quote, empowerment is the process by which women take control over their lives, acquiring the ability to make extra strategic choices, unquote. Depending on their cultures of origin and level of education, women of different societies identify in the following order these main elements of empowerment: having more confidence, having more knowledge, being able to support a family, and being able to make more money. When the parties involved in trading coffee are satisfied with the conclusion of the agreed transaction, additional business is stimulated, contributing to develop permanent and successful business relations. Positive business experiences are desirable because, as the permanent crop that coffee is, long-term relations provide investment security and an environment of trust to negotiate. The way in which coffee is traded has evolved dynamically, especially since the beginning of specialty coffees in 1986, followed by many certifications. In the same way that coffee as an agricultural product has developed by growing different varieties and in applying diverse methods of drying and milling, different processes aimed at satisfying diverse market segments have been adopted and have also evolved. In addition to the traditional mainstream market, the evolution in coffee quality has caused the product to be rediscovered, creating specialized segments that appreciate the higher quality in recognition of the work performed by dedicated and careful producers. Efficiency requires professionalization, and the coffee guide is an indispensable tool for becoming a coffee professional. It is a reliable handbook of reference that answers questions and clarifies doubts that are frequent when trading coffee. There are numerous sources of information on coffee that are valuable and are kept updated. However, when you need answers to specific questions related to trading, for example, concerning the issue of contracts and the rights and obligations that they represent, the only source of reliable and impartial information is the Coffee Guide that provides ample information on the entire range of details that are involved in trading coffee. In order to trade coffee efficiently, individuals must learn to collect the information that will enable them to know how much coffee will need to be offered for sale or purchase, when will the coffee need to be shipped or delivered at destination, whichever the case may be. The quality needs to be accurately defined before the price of a transaction is agreed. If certified coffee is sold, the Coffee Guide explains the diverse licenses that are available. There are multiple details that need to be handled accurately before getting a shipment afloat, or for coffee to be delivered punctually by truck or train at the destination where delivery has been instructed. All requirements and events that might occur are described in the handbook in a thorough and impartial manner. Despite the economic, political, weather factors, pests and diseases that traditionally have affected the supply and demand of coffee and its prices, the volume of coffee produced has been able to meet the demand of the much larger population and of new consuming markets, in addition to higher domestic demand in producing countries. So the growth of the coffee business has attracted many more actors that need to perform professionally in order to place their products successfully in the market. However, the effects of climate change on coffee production are creeping, and there is no sign that measures to find solutions have an important place on the agenda of the countries with a greater responsibility of causing it. Coffee supply is already affected, and as time goes by, it will become more evident. I feel certain that with the interest of learning the information provided by the Coffee Guide, women in coffee will be empowered with knowledge and will become competent and confident professionals able to define the strategy for their success. That's what I can tell you about trading in a few words, because that guide is so complete, that has been always complete, more on the trading side. But now it's really perfect. I really loved the last edition, and I do commend.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza, for your input. It's very important because you have an extensive experience about business, and this is precisely what we need to approach and bring over to other women. So now, from another perspective of the coffee industry, I would like to introduce you Stephanie Davila. She is a third-generation coffee farmer from Guatemala with 15 years of professional experience in areas that include coffee production, trading, sales, and roasting. She enjoys sharing information about the coffee industry in her Spanish language online business school and cafe, and in her English language social media channels with the handle @StephTalksCoffee. So she's becoming very famous, Stephanie, and we're very proud of having you here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Blanca. Well, thanks, everyone. I feel super honored to be part of this panel today and share my perspective about the Coffee Guide. And I want to start with an anecdote. So I started working in coffee when I was 21. Now I'm 37. When I started working in coffee, I remember I was one of those people who the guide was given to, and I was like, oh my gosh, just looking at this beautiful book. I'm like, I can't believe there's a book that has everything on coffee, and I never heard about it before, like, what is this? So it was super eye-opening. I remember the first book I got exposed to is the guide that was like the 2002. And then I remember when the third edition came out, and I was like, this is even better. Like, it had more information, it had more things. And I was like, just blown away with all the information it had available for free. right? And it was also available online. So even if you couldn't afford to pay for the book, it was just free, just there. And what surprised me the most at the moment was that not many people knew about it. So it was somehow, I would say, like surprising that such a resource was available, and it was available for everyone. And not a lot of people knew about it. So I started like personally spreading the word about it, like telling everybody I knew who wanted to learn about coffee, hey, there's this guy, just go look at it. And it's just like overwhelming to think that a problem, which is the lack of information, can be solved so easily, but at the same time, sometimes we just don't know where to find this knowledge, right? But it's there. So first of all, really want to appreciate the work of the International Trade Center for all these years, for every time coming up with a better and better guide. Because now, having seen 3 guides by now, I am number one, super honored to have been a collaborator in this edition, but also to see how much more and how much easier it is to read this 4th edition. Because I have to say, for me, for some time, what I realized, is that some chapters were a little confusing for me because there's a lot of technical information. And I think this 4th guide definitely manages to make it more, like a more comprehensive approach and easier to digest edition in terms of like the quality of information, the technicalities, but at the same time, they're so much easier to understand and to follow. I mean, I just, every time with more professionals involved, and I guess with more information, I am also impressed. We managed to get this book, not that big, considering all the information that's in here. So great job also kind of summarizing important topics. So now from the point of view of education, I think, as Blanca was saying, in 2020, I started a non-for-profit project called En Café Business School. In Spanish is Escuela de Negocios en Café. The objective of this project is just to share information, especially about the commercial aspect, because I have been involved in coffee production, but I have also been privileged with the opportunity to work in the commercial side, like working for exporters, working for importers. I also had my own coffee roaster company a couple of years ago that I had to close because I moved, but I have been blessed with the opportunity of working in so many steps of the supply chain that I feel like compelled to share this information, especially as I was saying in the commercial side, which there's not a lot of information available openly. So if you want to start selling coffee or being a trader, it's not like you can go somewhere and learn easily, like being a barista, I think there's more resources. Being a roaster, there's more resources, but being a trader, being a person who sells green coffee, especially, there's not a lot. So that's what I try to do through En Café. And the guide is actually a resource I recommend a lot to everyone in the coffee school, because I feel it has everything. Now, I do believe that, as I was saying, this 4th edition has a lot of new topics involving like the waves of coffee, new trends, the financial access, to the access to finance, sustainability issues that are definitely things that we need to consider. So I feel like if you have read the coffee guide before, you need to read the new one. I mean, you need to read a new edition and make sure you see all this amazing knowledge that it's included in this one again, because it will bring a lot of new resources for your ability to manage and to talk about things that are like happening at this very moment. So definitely, I think it's a great resource. I always recommend it. I can see how now it includes so much more information about coffee quality as well, in a more comprehensive way, I would say. Like it includes the SCA flavor wheel, which the previous one I can recall, but I don't recall it. It was there. So now I can see better, and it's like a more unified, like, let's say, way of seeing and speaking the same language. Because remember that coffee quality is just about us together coming in a common understanding of what we want to say and what we call quality and how it's assessed. So I am very happy to see a lot of information about how to assess quality in the new guide, in the new edition. Also, when we talk about trading, I feel like it's the hedging part of the chapter of the guide. Also, it has a lot of more information, easier to digest in terms of all the technicalities that chapter involves. And I think it's just overwhelming to see also the charts that chapter includes in terms of how much of paper coffee is traded versus the real coffee underlying asset. And that's another issue that needs to be addressed, but we need to know about it. So summarizing maybe a little bit, I would say the coffee guide is definitely a resource that I use, that I recommend using. And I think that we are very, very lucky to have access to it for free. So please do not waste any more time. Just go straight to the site and start exploring this new edition, because I know there's a lot of work, effort, love put into this guide to make it possible and to just make it accessible in also as many languages as it is available right now. I agree with Sarah's comment that knowledge is power. So I feel like this is one of the best gifts especially for the female community in coffee, who probably has been underserved for so long, and know that we can have access to this. And now we are part of also developing these tools. We're not just observers, but also we are taking action. And I loved also Maritza's words about all the empowerment and how knowledge is key for this. And I think we have in our hands a wonderful tool. It's not to be missed. And thank you again. I don't know if I used all of my time or went past my time, but thank you for the opportunity to share. And
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. This is great. I know you've been using it a lot for your courses and all your classes that you give. So it's a great backup that you are having with the coffee guide. So thank you so much for joining us and being here today. So before we go, we go to our wrap up. Thanks to Catherine, she will help me with that. I like to comment about the questions, about the Q&A section. Yes, Sarah.
No, I would also like to address one of the comments. Should I go after you? Should I go now? Or
No, you go right now. Yes, please.
Okay, so basically there was one comment I read from Orietta Pinto. She says, why do some women express that there is no inequity for women in the industry? They consider that if a woman hasn't reached the levels of their male counterparts, it is because they haven't fought enough or are not as prepared. Why do they do this? Don't they understand they are minimizing the struggle that women are facing? I think this is an important comment, because as with many vulnerable groups, you see a lot of waves of misinformation that make these vulnerable groups feel invalidated, basically, in the pressures that they feel. And at the source of all these waves of misinformation is basically a lack of knowledge. If you fact check any of these kind of random statements, you'll see that there are no facts behind them. So again, I would say knowledge is power. So, there are so many research papers out there, so many studies that actually prove even the coffee guide. If you go to page 69 of the coffee guide, it says, for example, for women producers, a 2015 white paper by the Specialty Coffee Association of America found that men have an 8-hour workday while women work up to 15 hours a day. So, there is information out there, and there are serious publications that recognize that there is a total situation of injustice. So yeah, that's what I have to say. It's that basically do your research and you can quickly quash those kind of comments.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for bringing this up. I cannot agree more on Orieta's comment on these regards. And this is, again, one of the reasons that why we need to stick together and spread the word and acknowledge ourselves as people who are bringing gender issues up to the public and discuss about it. Stephanie, would you like to add anything else?
Yes, I'd like just to add a quick comment. I feel like in line with what Sarah said, it's also very difficult to recognize inequity and injustice when you haven't been part of the struggle. So I think most of the women who might feel this way, it could be because they were born in a privileged environment where you didn't have to struggle with that. But that doesn't mean that everybody who was born in a privileged environment cannot see it. You know, like I feel like there's more, if you're sensitive towards that, as Sarah was saying, you can look for information, but you can just understand when somebody is telling you the struggles that they have been facing. It's like racism. It's like all, ethnicity problems. It's like poverty. Like it's hard to understand how someone cannot get out of poverty because they haven't had access to education or opportunities. But when you're on the other side, it might be, no, they're just lazy. They just don't want to work, right? It's easy to say that when you have the opportunities and you have had a better path. So I think it's just a little bit of maybe not putting the empathy necessary to understand the problem and to know that there's much more behind it than what you as a human being in your circumstances can probably see. That's it.
Yeah, going out of our comfort zone and look a little further out of the window or out the door on what's happening out there. And yeah, you are completely right, Stephanie. So we're almost at the end of our session today. Thank you so much. And before closing it, Catherine, would you like to add something else? I think you have something valuable to share, because most of the other questions that we received in our Q&A window is about how to get the books, the coffee guide, the translation, etc., etc. So can you please enlighten us on more information about this?
Yes, and thank you all for your time today. Stephanie, Maritza, Blanca, and Sarah, it was so wonderful to hear your contributions, and I loved hearing your stories about your experience with the coffee guide, even before this edition. So what's next? I think that it might be obvious that even with a book that is, you know, it's not super huge, as Stephanie mentioned, but it's still pretty thick. It's not necessarily reaching our goal of inclusivity in terms of readership. If, for example, some people don't want to read, you know, an entire book online or, you know, a big publication. So what we are working towards is putting this content online in a more user-friendly, even more user-friendly context. We're not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but the goal is making these resources even more accessible and easy to digest, organized by different chapters. What it will include is toolkits, you know, so more how to do some of the things that are mentioned in each of the chapters. We'd love to include case studies and links to existing resources. So we don't want to replicate, we want to actually highlight the work that is being done by so many different organizations and show the best information out there. We have an upcoming translation in Amharic done with our partners with an ITC project in Ethiopia. So that will reach our readers in Ethiopia. And we are looking to continue to promote the guide through webinars, industry events, and through your networks and organization. This is where we're reaching out to you. So if you have interesting tools, if you have case studies, if you have information that your organizations, you individually or your organization can contribute, please reach out to me as to how to get involved. What we are working to is taking this group of 70 expert contributors and creating a network to continue to deepen our knowledge on these different topics, to continue collaboration and broaden and deepen our knowledge about the coffee sector. So Sarah, if you'll go to the next slide. Some ways that you can help us promote this information among your networks. We have a Trello board that is our communications hub for all your promotional needs. That link is here. But you can also reach out to Sarah or myself if you are interested in further promoting or using the guide within your organization. If you would like to promote the guide among your network or at industry events, we're happy to share that information with you, because the point is we want this information in the hands of as many people as possible. And yeah, the next slide has our information, the link to download the guide. Please reach out to Sarah or I with any questions or ideas that you might have. Thank you so much.